The brass bell above the shop door had just finished its gentle chime when I heard Ryan's voice cutting through the afternoon quiet like a rusty blade. My hands froze on the Edwardian brooch I'd been cataloging, the delicate filigree suddenly feeling sharp against my fingertips. 2 years. 2 years since I'd walked away from him, from the apartment we'd shared, from the life I'd thought we were building together. 2 years since I'd found him tangled in my best friend's sheets, their laughter dying the moment I opened the bedroom door. "Lily, I know you're in there." His voice was slurred, that familiar edge of desperation that used to make me want to fix whatever was wrong. Now it just made my stomach clench with a different kind of dread. Through the shop's front window, I could see him swaying on the sidewalk, his shirt wrinkled and half untucked. The Ryan I'd known had been meticulous about his appearance, always perfectly pressed. This version looked like he'd been sleeping in his clothes. I set the brooch down carefully on the velvet-lined tray, my movements deliberate, despite the way my pulse had started hammering against my ribs. The shop felt smaller suddenly, the towering mahogany shelves crammed with centuries of other people's treasures now seeming less like a sanctuary and more like a maze with no exit. Mrs. Chen, the owner, had stepped out 20 minutes ago to meet with an estate sale representative. I was alone. "Come on, baby. Just talk to me." Ryan's palm slapped against the window, making the glass shudder. "You can't ignore me forever. We need to talk about what happened. It was a mistake, you know that. Sarah didn't mean anything." My jaw clenched so hard I felt it in my temples. Sarah. The name still stung like iodine on a fresh wound. She'd been my friend since college, the one who'd helped me move into my first apartment, who'd held my hair back when I had food poisoning, who'd sworn she'd never let a man come between us. Until one did. Until Ryan. I backed away from the counter, my sensible flat silent on the worn Persian rug that covered the shop's hardwood floor. The familiar scent of old wood and furniture polish usually calmed me, but today it felt cloying, thick in my throat. I moved deeper into the shop, past the Victorian writing desk with its forest of tiny drawers, past the collection of Art Deco jewelry in the locked display case, past the shelf of antique pocket watches that ticked their separate rhythms into the dusty air. That's when I collided with something solid and warm. "Careful." The voice was low, controlled, with an accent I couldn't quite place. Something European, refined, but with an edge that made the single word sound less like concern and more like a command. Strong hands steadied me by my upper arms, and I looked up into a face that made my breath catch for an entirely different reason than Ryan's arrival had. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with dark hair swept back from a face composed of sharp angles and shadows. But it was his eyes that held me frozen, gray, like storm clouds, assessing me with an intensity that felt almost physical. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent, the kind of tailoring that whispered money rather than shouting it. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the hollow of his throat, and on his wrist was a watch that I recognized immediately as a Patek Philippe, vintage, worth more than most people made in a year. "I apologize," I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. "I didn't realize anyone else was in the shop." Clearly. His hands remained on my arms a moment longer than strictly necessary before releasing me. "Though I'm curious why you're fleeing from the man outside who's making quite the scene." Heat flooded my cheeks. Of course he'd heard. Of course he knew. The shop wasn't that large, and Ryan's voice carried like he wanted the whole street to witness his performance. "Ex-boyfriend," I said shortly, smoothing down my blouse even though it didn't need smoothing. It was a nervous habit, one I'd developed during the months after the breakup, when I felt like everything about me needed constant adjusting, constant fixing. "He's drunk and being ridiculous. I'm sure he'll leave soon." "Will he?" The The stranger's gaze moved past me toward the front window, where Ryan's silhouette was visible, pacing back and forth. He seems rather persistent. "Lily!" Ryan's voice grew louder, more aggressive. "I see you back there. Stop hiding and face me like an adult. We need to talk about us, about giving me another chance." Sarah was nothing. You hear me? Nothing. I closed my eyes, mortification washing over me in waves. This was exactly what I'd been trying to avoid for 2 years. Drama, confrontation, Ryan's particular brand of entitled neediness that had once felt like devotion, but now revealed itself as something far less flattering. "I should probably call someone," I said, more to myself than to the stranger. "Mrs. Chen will know what to do when she gets back." "And how long until she returns?" "Maybe 20 minutes? Half an hour?" I glanced at the antique clock on the wall, its brass pendulum swinging with mechanical precision. Time felt elastic suddenly, each second stretching uncomfortably as Ryan's voice continued its assault on my carefully rebuilt piece. The stranger made a considering sound, still studying the front of the shop with those unsettling gray eyes, long enough for him to either break the window or draw a crowd. Neither option seems particularly pleasant for business. He wasn't wrong. Ambridge Antiques had a reputation for discretion, for being a quiet haven where serious collectors could browse without the aggressive sales tactics of larger galleries. The last thing we needed was a spectacle. "What would you suggest?" I asked, hearing the edge of sarcasm in my voice even as I felt my hands trembling. "Because I'm open to ideas that don't involve me having to actually speak to him." The corner of his mouth lifted in something that wasn't quite a smile. I could have a word with him. "No." The response was immediate, visceral. Something about this man suggested that any word he had would be the kind that left lasting impressions, and not the good kind. "I appreciate the offer, but I can handle Ryan. He's just drunk and stupid, not dangerous." "Are you certain?" The question was mild, but his eyes had narrowed, focused on something beyond the window. "Because he's trying the door now." My head whipped around. Ryan had his hand on the antique brass handle, turning it, testing it. Thank God I'd locked it after Mrs. Chen left, standard procedure when working alone. But the old lock was finicky, and if he put enough pressure on it. "Lily, open this door right now. I know you're avoiding me. It's been 2 years, for Christ's sake. How long are you going to punish me for one mistake?" One mistake. As if betrayal could be quantified, as if the shattering of trust was merely a single misstep that could be apologized away. My fingernails dug into my palms. He really doesn't understand boundaries, does he? The stranger's voice held a note of something dark, something that made me look at him more carefully. He'd moved slightly, positioning himself between me and the door, though I hadn't noticed him doing it. The movement had been fluid, automatic, like a chess piece sliding into position. Ryan never did, I admitted. He thought persistence was romantic. Turns out it's just exhausting. "Lily, I swear to God, if you don't open this door..." "What will you do, Ryan?" The words escaped before I could stop them, years of suppressed anger finally finding voice. "Break it down? Scream louder? Maybe call Sarah and see if she'll come hold your hand while you harass me?" The silence that followed was absolute. Even the pocket watches seemed to hold their breath. Then Ryan's face appeared at the window, pressed close to the glass, his eyes wild and unfocused. "You bitch!" he snarled, all pretense of romantic desperation evaporating. "You sanctimonious little bitch. You think you're so much better than me now, working in your precious little shop, pretending to be some kind of expert. You're nothing, Lily. You were nothing when I met you. And you're nothing now. Nobody else is going to want you. Nobody else is going to..." The stranger moved. One moment he was beside me. The next he was there, his hand sliding around my waist with shocking familiarity, pulling me against his side. His other hand came up to cup my jaw, tilting my face toward his. I had exactly 1 second to register what was happening before his mouth covered mine. The kiss was nothing like the tentative, fumbling kisses Ryan and I had shared when we first started dating. This was deliberate, controlled, and absolutely devastating in its confidence. His lips moved against mine with practiced skill, the kind that suggested he'd done this before, many times, with many women. But there was nothing mechanical about it. The kiss held heat, possession, a claiming that made something low in my stomach tighten with surprise. My hands came up instinctively, gripping the lapels of his expensive suit. I should have pushed him away. Should have been outraged by the presumption, the invasion of my personal space. Instead, I found myself responding, my mouth opening under his, my body leaning into the solid warmth of him. It was the shock, I told myself. Just the shock of the moment. The relief of having Ryan's tirade interrupted. Nothing more. But when the stranger's hand tightened on my waist, his thumb tracing a slow circle against the fabric of my blouse, I felt something shift inside me. Something that had been dormant for 2 years, suddenly stirring to life. He pulled back slowly, his gray eyes holding mine for a long moment before turning deliberately toward the window, toward Ryan, who stood frozen on the sidewalk, his face gone pale. "I believe the lady has moved on," the stranger said, his voice carrying clearly through the glass. His accent was more pronounced now, each word precisely articulated. "I suggest you do the same." Ryan's mouth worked soundlessly. Then he saw the watch on the stranger's wrist, and whatever color remained in his face drained completely. He took a step back, then another, his hands coming up in a placating gesture I'd never seen him make before. When he turned and practically ran down the street, I realized I'd been holding my breath. The stranger's arm remained around my waist. His thumb was still tracing those maddening circles. When I looked up at him, something in his expression made my pulse skip. Not fear, though perhaps it should have been. Interest, maybe. Curiosity about what kind of man could kiss a stranger like that and send another man fleeing with nothing more than a look. "Thank you," I managed, my voice coming out breathier than intended. That was effective. "I'm Kieran." He said it like it should mean something, like his name carried weight. Maybe it did, given Ryan's reaction. "Lily, but you already knew that." His mouth curved in that almost smile again. Hard to miss, given the serenade. I should have stepped away from him, should have put proper distance between us. Instead, I found myself asking, "The pocket watch you were looking at earlier, the Victorian one with the hunting scene engraving, are you interested in purchasing it?" Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps, or approval. "Among other things." His gaze traveled slowly over my face, lingering on my mouth. Though I find I'm now interested in a rather different acquisition. Heat bloomed in my cheeks again, but this time it felt different. Less like embarrassment and more like awareness. I recognized flirtation when I heard it, though it had been so long since anyone had flirted with me that I'd almost forgotten how it felt. And I definitely wasn't used to it from men who looked like they'd stepped out of an Italian fashion magazine and kissed like they'd written the manual on seduction. "The watch is $1,200, I said, trying to reclaim some professional footing. "It's in excellent condition, fully functional, with the original case and papers. A remarkable piece for any collection." "I'll take it." He said it without hesitation, without even asking to examine it more closely. "And I'd like to discuss your expertise with antique pieces. I'm hosting a private auction next month. Rare artifacts, primarily European, some pieces quite valuable. I could use someone with knowledge to authenticate items and advise on proper handling." My eyebrows rose. Private auctions were expensive affairs, usually invitation-only events for serious collectors with serious money. Mr. Kieran is fine. Kieran, I'm flattered, but I mostly work with small estate pieces here. Nothing on the scale of what you're describing. Knowledge is knowledge, he said simply. And I've been watching you catalog that brooch for the last 20 minutes. Your attention to detail is exactly what I need. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. You've been watching me for 20 minutes? Observing, he corrected, unfazed by my alarm. There's a difference. I needed to see if you were truly knowledgeable or merely decorative. You passed the test before your ex-boyfriend arrived to provide additional entertainment. There was something in his tone that should have warned me. Something in the casual way he admitted to surveillance, to testing me without my knowledge or consent. But I was still processing the kiss, still feeling the ghost of his mouth on mine, and my usual common sense seemed to have temporarily vacated the premises. The auction is in a month, you said? He inclined his head. I'll pay consultant rates, of course. $5,000 for the event, plus travel and accommodation if any viewing requires it. $5,000. I tried not to let my shock show, but given that I made barely $30,000 a year working for Mrs. Chen, it was hard to maintain composure. That was nearly 2 months' salary for what sounded like a few days' work. I'll need to check with Mrs. Chen, I hedged. Make sure she can spare me. Already done. At my startled look, he smiled, a real smile this time, showing white teeth that somehow made him look more predatory rather than less. I spoke with her briefly before you arrived. She's quite enthusiastic about the opportunity for her shop to be associated with high-end collectors. Consider it part of your training. Mrs. Chen knew about this? Had agreed to it? I felt like I'd missed several important steps in a conversation. When would you need an answer? Now would be ideal. He pulled a business card from his inner pocket, the cardstock heavy and cream-colored, embossed with a single name, Kieran Volkov. No company name, no title. Just the name and a phone number. Though I'm willing to give you until tomorrow morning to decide. Fair warning, however. I don't often make offers twice. The card felt expensive between my fingers, the kind of subtle wealth that didn't need to announce itself. Kieran Volkov. The surname was Russian, which explained the slight accent I couldn't place earlier. And there was something else about that name, something tickling at the back of my memory. But I couldn't quite catch it. I'll call you, I said, slipping the card into my pocket. One way or another, by 10 tomorrow morning. Excellent. He stepped back finally, breaking the circle of intimacy we'd somehow created in the middle of Mrs. Chen's shop. And Lily? If your ex returns, don't hesitate to contact me. I'm quite good at handling persistent problems. The way he said it sent another chill through me, though this one was harder to classify. Warning, promise, threat. With Kieran Volkov, it seemed entirely possible the answer was all three. He collected his pocket watch, paid in cash, $1,200 bills he produced from a money clip without counting, and left with a nod that felt more like a dismissal than a goodbye. The bell above the door chimed his departure, and suddenly I was alone in the shop again, holding a stack of bills and questioning everything that had just happened. My fingers drifted to my lips. I could still feel the kiss, the confident pressure of his mouth, the way his hand had curved possessively around my waist. Ryan had kissed me hundreds of times in the 2 years we'd been together, but none of those kisses had ever made my knees feel unsteady. This was ridiculous. I was being ridiculous. Kieran Volkov was clearly wealthy, clearly accustomed to getting what he wanted, and apparently, what he wanted included kissing strange women in antique shops to prove a point to their ex-boyfriends. That didn't make him Prince Charming. It made him presumptuous at best, dangerous at worst. But $5,000. I locked the money in the shop's safe and returned to cataloging the brooch, trying to focus on the familiar task. The filigree work was exceptional, Probably 1910s based on the style, with seed pearls arranged in a floral pattern. My hands moved automatically, recording measurements and conditions in the shop's inventory system. But my mind was elsewhere. Kieran Volkov. The name bothered me, nagging like a forgotten appointment. Where had I heard it before? By the time Mrs. Chen returned, full of apologies for the delay and excited chatter about the estate sale she'd just attended, I'd finished the brooch and moved on to a collection of Victorian hairpins. I listened to her describe the treasures she'd acquired: a complete set of Meissen porcelain, some Art Nouveau jewelry, a writing desk that needed restoration but had good bones, while trying to figure out how to bring up Kieran's offer. Mrs. Chen, I finally interrupted her enthusiastic cataloging. Did a man come in earlier? Tall, dark hair, expensive suit. Said his name was Kieran? Her eyes lit up. Mr. Volkov. Yes. Such a distinguished gentleman. He was very interested in the pocket watches. Did he make a purchase? The Victorian hunting scene piece. Paid in cash. I paused, choosing my words carefully. He also mentioned something about a private auction. Said he'd spoken with you about having me help authenticate items. Mrs. Chen's smile grew even wider. Oh, yes. What an opportunity, Lily. Mr. Volkov is very well connected in the collector's world. Having Ambridge Antiques associated with his events could bring us clients we'd never reach otherwise. I told him of course you'd be available to help. Of course she did. Mrs. Chen was a brilliant businesswoman, but she sometimes forgot that her employees might have opinions about how their time was allocated. It's just, I began carefully. I don't know anything about Mr. Volkov. What kind of collector he is, what his reputation. Impeccable, she assured me, waving away my concerns with a gesture that set her jade bracelets jingling. He's been collecting for years, very discriminating taste. Specializes in European antiquities, particularly items with interesting histories. Military pieces, nobility artifacts, things with provenance. Very serious business. Very serious business. Something about the way she said it made me uneasy, but I couldn't articulate why. And you trust him? Mrs. Chen's expression softened. Lily, dear, I understand you're cautious after what happened with Ryan, but not every man is going to betray you. Mr. Volkov came highly recommended by 3 separate dealers I trust. This is a legitimate opportunity, one that could be very good for your career if you're thinking of eventually opening your own shop someday. My own shop. That had been the dream once, before Ryan and the betrayal and the slow erosion of every plan I'd made. Mrs. Chen was right. I was cautious now, suspicious of opportunities that seemed too good to be true. But $5,000 was real money. Money that could go toward savings, toward that distant dream of independence. All right, I said slowly. I'll do it. But just this one event. If it feels wrong or if he's unprofessional, then you'll walk away immediately, and I'll support that decision completely. Mrs. Chen squeezed my hand, her skin papery and warm. Trust your instincts, Lily. They've kept you safe this far. That night, alone in my studio apartment that still felt too empty 2 years after Ryan's departure, I pulled out Kieran's card and stared at it. The embossing caught the light from my desk lamp, the letters seeming to shift and shimmer. I opened my laptop and typed his name into the search bar. The results made my stomach drop. Kieran Volkov wasn't just a collector. He was the Kieran Volkov, owner of multiple galleries across Europe, runner of high-stakes private auctions that catered to billionaires and royalty, and according to several forums I found buried in the search results, a man with connections to the kind of business that didn't get discussed in polite company. The black market, stolen artifacts, things that disappeared from museums and reappeared in private collections. Nothing concrete, nothing that could be proven, just whispers and speculation, and carefully worded warnings about dealing with him. but enough to paint a picture that was very different from the one Mrs. Chen had described. I should have called him right then and declined. Should have stayed in my safe, small world where the most dangerous thing I faced was a drunk ex-boyfriend and late rent. But my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. I look forward to your answer. K. And despite every instinct screaming at me to run, despite the warnings scattered across my laptop screen, I found myself thinking about gray eyes and a kiss that had felt like falling off a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I thought about $5,000 and the dream of my own shop. I thought about the way Ryan had fled at the sight of Kieran's watch, and I thought about the way I'd felt for those few seconds in Kieran's arms. Not broken, not betrayed, not small and careful. Alive. I called Kieran at exactly 10 the next morning, my finger hovering over the dial button for a full minute before I finally pressed it. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting. Lily, I trust you've made a decision. No greeting, no pleasantries, straight to business. I appreciated that more than I wanted to admit. I'll do it, I said, keeping my voice professional. The authentication work for your auction. But I have conditions. A pause, then what sounded like genuine amusement. Conditions. How refreshing. Go on. Everything stays professional. No more surprise kisses, no personal involvement beyond the scope of the work. And if anything about this feels illegal or questionable, I walk away immediately. No questions, no arguments. Agreed. He said it so easily that I wondered if he'd expected the boundaries, perhaps even approved of them. Though I should note that the kiss yesterday wasn't unprofessional. It was strategic. Your ex-boyfriend needed to understand you were no longer available for his dramatics. You could have just asked me to pretend to be with someone. I could have, he acknowledged, but that wouldn't have been nearly as effective, or as enjoyable. Heat crept up my neck. Mr. Volkov. Kieran. And I'm teasing you, Lily. Professional distance as requested. The auction preview is this Friday at my gallery here in the city. I'll send a car for you at 6. Dress is cocktail attire. You'll be meeting some of the potential bidders, and first impressions matter in this world. A car, cocktail attire, meeting billionaires. This was so far outside my normal existence that I almost laughed. I don't really have cocktail attire, I admitted. My wardrobe is mostly work clothes for the shop. Then go shopping. Consider it a business expense. Before I could protest, he continued. I'll have my assistant transfer an advance to your account this afternoon. $2,000 should be sufficient for appropriate clothing and any other necessities. The remainder will be paid upon completion of the event. $2,000 just for clothes. I thought of my closet with its collection of sensible blouses and practical slacks, the single black dress I'd worn to my grandmother's funeral 3 years ago. Nothing in there would be remotely suitable for the kind of event Kieran was describing. That's very generous, but it's not generosity, it's investment. If you're representing my interests, you need to look the part. My assistant will also send over a portfolio of the items you'll be authenticating. Familiarize yourself with them before Friday. Any questions about provenance or documentation, contact me directly. He hung up before I could respond, leaving me staring at my phone and wondering what I'd just agreed to. The money appeared in my account 3 hours later, along with an email from someone named Dmitry Sokolov containing 50 pages of detailed photographs and documentation. I spent my lunch break scrolling through images of artifacts that took my breath away. A Fabergé cigarette case, a medieval illuminated manuscript page, a collection of Napoleonic medals, a Renaissance-era dagger with a jeweled hilt. Each piece was worth more than I'd make in years at the shop. And someone was trusting me to authenticate them. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in 2 years. I went shopping for myself. Not practical shopping for work necessities or grocery staples, but actual shopping for pleasure. The boutique Kieran's assistant had recommended in the email was in a part of the city I rarely visited, where the storefronts gleamed with subtle elegance, and the price tags made my eyes water. But the saleswoman who greeted me was kind rather than condescending. And when I explained what I needed, something sophisticated but not overly formal, something that would help me look knowledgeable rather than decorative, she seemed to understand immediately. We settled on a deep emerald dress with a fitted bodice and a skirt that moved like water when I walked. It was the most expensive single item I'd ever purchased for myself, and when I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked confident, professional, like someone who belonged in Kieran Volkov's world. The illusion lasted until I got home and spent the next 3 nights barely sleeping, studying the auction portfolio until I could recite the provenance of every piece from memory. The Fabergé case had belonged to a Russian count before the Revolution. The manuscript page was from a 14th century Book of Hours, probably French based on the illustration style. The medals had been awarded during the Peninsular War, each one with detailed records of the recipient's service. Everything was immaculately documented. Everything had a clear chain of ownership. Everything was exactly what it claimed to be. So why did I feel like I was missing something? Friday arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind of late September evening that felt like summer's last gift before autumn took hold completely. The car Kieran sent was a black Mercedes with a driver who introduced himself as Anton and treated me with the same courteous professionalism I'd expect for someone far more important. We drove through the city as the sun set, painting the buildings in shades of amber and rose, until we reached the gallery district I'd only ever seen in magazines. Kieran's gallery occupied the ground floor of a converted warehouse, all exposed brick and soaring ceilings with track lighting that made the space feel like a modern cathedral. Through the windows, I could see people already inside. Men in tailored suits, women in designer dresses, everyone holding champagne flutes and moving through the space with the casual confidence of those who belonged there. I didn't belong there. The thought hit me as Anton opened my door, and I had to force myself to step out onto the sidewalk. My new dress suddenly felt like a costume. My carefully applied makeup like war paint for a battle I wasn't equipped to fight. Miss Reyes. Kieran's voice made me turn, and I found him standing in the gallery's entrance, backlit by the warm interior glow. He wore a black suit tonight, the jacket perfectly tailored to his broad shoulders, his shirt a crisp white that made his gray eyes seem even more intense. When he looked at me, something flickered in his expression. Approval, perhaps, or satisfaction. "You look exceptional." "Thank you." I smoothed my hands over the dress, that nervous gesture reasserting itself. I wasn't sure if this would be appropriate. "It's perfect." He offered his arm, a gesture that felt oddly old-fashioned and completely natural at the same time. "Come, let me introduce you to some of the collectors, and then you can examine the pieces. Several bidders have questions about authenticity that I'd prefer to have you address directly." I took his arm, feeling the solid warmth of him through the expensive fabric of his suit. As we walked into the gallery, I became acutely aware of the eyes that turned toward us, assessing, curious, calculating. Kieran navigated the social dynamics with effortless grace, introducing me to a Swedish software billionaire interested in the Napoleonic medals, a Japanese art dealer who specialized in European antiquities, a British lord whose family collection had been partially sold off to pay death taxes. Each introduction followed the same pattern. Kieran would present me as his authentication specialist, mention some detail about my work at Ambridge Antiques that he couldn't possibly have known unless he'd done extensive research, and then guide the conversation toward their specific collecting interests. Within minutes, I found myself discussing the finer points of Fabergé workshops with the software billionaire, explaining the difference between authentic medieval illumination techniques and later forgeries to the art dealer, describing the service records associated with each Napoleonic medal to the lord. I fell into the rhythm of it without thinking, my knowledge carrying me past my nervousness. This was what I did, what I was good at, seeing the details others missed, understanding the stories objects carried with them through time. The dress, the gallery, the champagne, all of it faded into background as I focused on what I knew. It was only when Kieran's hand settled at the small of my back, warm and possessive, that I remembered where I was, who I was with. "You're a natural at this," he murmured, his breath warm against my ear as he leaned in to speak privately. "They trust you instinctively. It's quite valuable." "They trust the knowledge," I corrected, stepping slightly away from his touch even as my skin tingled from the contact. "The expertise speaks for itself." "Does it?" His gray eyes held mine, and I saw something calculating in their depths, something that reminded me of the warnings I'd read online. "I think you underestimate your own charm, Lily. These collectors respond to more than just facts. They respond to confidence, to passion for the work. You have both in abundance." Before I could respond, a woman in a scarlet dress appeared at Kieran's elbow, her hand resting on his arm with familiar ease. She was stunning in that effortless way some women achieved, with dark hair swept into an elegant chignon and diamonds glittering at her throat and wrists. "Kieran, darling, you've been hiding from me all evening." Her accent was French, her smile perfectly polite and completely cold when she glanced at me. "Surely you're not still upset about Monaco." "Isabella." Kieran's tone gave away nothing, his expression remaining pleasant but distant. "I wasn't aware you'd be attending this evening." "How could I miss it? You always acquire the most fascinating pieces." Her gaze traveled over me with the same assessing quality she might use for an auction lot. "And who is this?" "Lily Reyes, my authentication specialist for this event." Kieran's hand moved back to my waist, that possessive touch making a statement I wasn't sure I wanted him to make. "Lily, this is Isabella Moreau. She collects Renaissance artifacts." "Among other things," Isabella said, her smile sharpening. "Primarily I collect experiences, and Kieran provides such interesting ones. Don't you, darling?" The tension between them was palpable, thick enough that I felt like an intruder witnessing something private and complicated. Whatever history they shared, it wasn't resolved, and I had no desire to be caught in the middle of it. "If you'll excuse me," I said, seizing the opportunity to extract myself. "I should examine the dagger more closely. Lord Pemberton had some questions about the jeweled hilt that I want to address before the bidding begins." I didn't wait for permission, just stepped away from Kieran's touch and moved through the crowd toward the display, where the Renaissance dagger rested on black velvet under carefully controlled lighting. My hands were shaking slightly as I pulled on the cotton gloves I'd brought specifically for handling delicate artifacts, and I forced myself to focus on the blade's Damascus pattern, the way the steel had been folded and forged centuries ago by a master craftsman. "Running away so soon?" The voice was male, accented like Kieran's, but rougher, less refined. I looked up to find a man watching me from across the display case. He was younger than Kieran, maybe early 30s, with similar dark hair, but eyes that were brown instead of gray. Something about his stance suggested he was used to fighting, to physical confrontation rather than verbal sparring. "Can't say I blame you. Isabella has that effect on people." "I wasn't running," I said evenly. "I was working." "Of course." His smile suggested he didn't believe me for a second. "You're the expert Kieran brought in. Lily, right? I'm Alexei Volkov, Kieran's younger brother, though he rarely admits to the relation." Volkov. So this was family, which explained some of the similarities in appearance. But where Kieran moved with controlled precision, Alexei had a restless energy that made him seem constantly in motion even when standing still. "It's nice to meet you," I said, unsure of what else to say. "Are you interested in the dagger?" "Not particularly. I'm more interested in why my brother is collecting people these days." At my confused look, he laughed. "Kieran doesn't usually bring in outside consultants for authentication. He has a whole team of experts he works with regularly. Experts with decades of experience and impressive credentials. No offense, but you're what, 23? 24? Fresh out of art history graduate school and working in a secondhand shop?" The casual dismissal stung, particularly because part of it was true. I was 23, and while I had my degree, it was from a state school, not some prestigious institution. My experience was limited to 2 years at Ambridge Antiques, and whatever knowledge I'd absorbed from my grandmother, who'd been a dealer herself before she died. "I'm qualified for the work Kieran asked me to do," I said, hearing the defensive edge in my voice and hating it. "I'm sure you are." Alexi's gaze traveled over me with the same assessing quality Isabella had used. But where hers had been dismissive, his seemed more curious. "I'm just wondering what else Kieran thinks you're qualified for. My brother doesn't do anything without multiple reasons. If he brought you in, it's not just about authentication." A chill ran down my spine. What else would it be about? "That's what I'm trying to figure out." He leaned against the display case with a casualness that suggested he had no respect for the priceless artifacts it contained. Maybe he's trying to make Isabella jealous. Maybe he needs someone fresh and untainted by the usual gallery politics. Or maybe... His eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Maybe he saw something in you that reminded him of someone he lost. "I think you're reading too much into a simple business arrangement," I said, though uncertainty was creeping in. Was I really here just for my expertise? Or was I serving some purpose I didn't understand? Maybe. Alexei didn't sound convinced. But if I were you, I'd be careful. Kieran collects things. Beautiful things, rare things, things with interesting histories. And he doesn't like to let go of his acquisitions. Before I could respond, Kieran appeared at my shoulder, his presence sudden and somehow ominous. "Alexei, I wasn't aware you'd been invited." I wasn't. The younger Volkov pushed off from the display case, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. "But when has that ever stopped me? Family should support family, shouldn't they, brother? A family should respect boundaries." Kieran's voice was soft, dangerous in a way I hadn't heard before. "This is a business event, not a social gathering. Everything's business with you, Kieran. That's always been your problem." Alexei's gaze flicked to me, then back to his brother. "Try not to break this one, yeah? She seems nice." He walked away before Kieran could respond, disappearing into the crowd with the same restless energy he'd arrived with. I stood frozen, processing what had just happened, what Alexei had implied about his brother, and broken things and acquisitions that weren't allowed to leave. "I apologize for my brother," Kieran said, his hand settling once again on my waist. The gesture was becoming familiar, almost comfortable, which should have alarmed me more than it did. "He has a gift for inappropriate observations. Is he right?" I asked, looking up at Kieran's carefully neutral expression. "Am I here for more than authentication work?" Something flickered in those gray eyes. Calculation, decision, truth measured against strategic advantage. "You're here because you're brilliant at what you do, because collectors respond to your genuine passion, and because I enjoy your company. Does there need to be more reason than that?" It wasn't an answer. Not really. But before I could press further, the gallery lights dimmed slightly, and a woman I recognized as Kieran's assistant stepped to a small podium at the front of the space. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you'd please take your seats, the auction will begin shortly." The next 2 hours passed in a blur of bidding wars and subtle tensions. I sat beside Kieran at a table near the front, watching as each piece I'd authenticated sold for sums that made my head spin. The Fabergé case went for $200,000 to the Swedish billionaire. The manuscript page fetched $350,000 from a German museum representative. The Napoleonic medals sparked a fierce competition between Lord Pemberton and a private collector from Austria, finally settling at $180,000. And through it all, Kieran's attention never wavered from the proceedings. He was completely in his element here, conducting the auction with subtle gestures and meaningful glances, letting his assistant handle the actual calling of bids while he orchestrated the larger drama. I watched him work with a mixture of fascination and growing unease, seeing clearly now what Alexei had meant about collections and acquisitions. This was a man who knew how to identify value, how to acquire what he wanted, how to keep it. When the Renaissance dagger came up for bidding, Isabella entered the fray with aggressive determination. She drove the price higher and higher, clearly willing to pay whatever it took to win. But in the end, she lost to an anonymous phone bidder, who Kieran's assistant identified only as Client 47. The look Isabella shot Kieran as the gavel came down suggested she knew exactly who Client 47 was and wasn't happy about it. By the time the auction concluded, with the final tally exceeding $4 million in sales, my head was pounding from champagne and concentration. Kieran walked me through the emptying gallery toward where Anton waited with the car, his hand maintaining that now familiar position at the small of my back. "You exceeded expectations," he said as we reached the entrance. "The collectors trusted your assessments completely. Several have already expressed interest in future events, contingent on your participation." "I just told them what I knew," I said, exhaustion making me honest. "The pieces spoke for themselves." "Did they?" He turned to face me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive with notes of cedar and smoke. "Or did you give them context, history, meaning beyond mere provenance? That's what makes you valuable, Lily. Not just your knowledge, but your ability to make others care about it." The compliment warmed me more than it should have, especially after Alexei's warnings and Isabella's obvious jealousy and the general strangeness of an evening spent among millionaires. "Thank you," I said, "for the opportunity, and for trusting me with such valuable pieces." "The pieces were never at risk. I researched you thoroughly before approaching you at the shop. I knew your expertise was sound." His hand came up to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear, the gesture intimate and presumptuous and somehow completely natural. "It was your character I was curious about, whether you could handle this world without being corrupted by it. And what's your assessment?" His smile held secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "Still gathering data, but the preliminary results are promising." Anton coughed politely from beside the car, breaking the moment. Kieran stepped back, creating proper distance between us once more. "I'll contact you next week about payment and future opportunities," he said, his tone shifting back to business. "In the meantime, if you have any concerns or questions about tonight's event, don't hesitate to call." I nodded, suddenly eager to be back in my small apartment, away from gray eyes and complicated family dynamics and the seductive danger of Kieran Volkov's world. Anton held the door for me, and I slid into the Mercedes's leather interior with relief. But as we pulled away from the gallery, I looked back to see Kieran still standing in the entrance, his silhouette framed by golden light, watching me leave with an expression I couldn't read. And I realized that Alexei had been right about one thing. Kieran Volkov didn't do anything without multiple reasons. I just had no idea what all of them were yet. The check arrived by courier on Monday afternoon, $5,000 exactly as promised, along with a handwritten note on heavy cardstock that simply read, "Until next time. K." I deposited it immediately, watching my bank balance jump to a number I hadn't seen since before the breakup with Ryan, when we'd still been saving together for a future that would never materialize. The money felt both real and surreal, tangible proof that Friday's auction had actually happened and wasn't some elaborate fever dream. Mrs. Chen was delighted when I returned to work, full of questions about the event and the collectors I'd met. I gave her an edited version that emphasized the professional aspects and downplayed the personal tensions, particularly Isabella's obvious history with Kieran and Alexei's cryptic warnings. Some instinct told me to keep those complications private, at least until I understood them better myself. "You see?" Mrs. Chen said, beaming with satisfaction as she arranged a new display of Victorian jewelry. I told you Mr. Volkov was a legitimate opportunity, and now you have connections to serious collectors. This could be very good for both of us. She wasn't wrong. By Wednesday, 2 of the auction attendees had called the shop directly, asking if I could examine pieces they were considering for purchase. Small jobs, consulting work that paid a few $100s each, but it represented something larger, a foothold in a world I'd only glimpsed before. I was cataloging a collection of antique pocket watches when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Dinner tonight? I have a proposition for you. Kay. My pulse jumped, fingers tightening around the watch I'd been examining. Professional distance, I'd told him. No personal involvement beyond the scope of work. But dinner could be business, couldn't it? Kieran had mentioned future opportunities. What kind of proposition? I typed back, proud of how steady my thumbs were despite the nervous flutter in my stomach. The kind best discussed over wine and proper food. 8 p.m., Marconi's. Anton will collect you at 7:45. Marconi's. I'd heard of it. One of those Italian restaurants where reservations were impossible to get, and the prices weren't listed on the menu because if you had to ask, you couldn't afford it. The kind of place Ryan had always promised to take me someday, but never did. I should have declined. Should have insisted on meeting at a coffee shop during daylight hours, somewhere neutral and public where business could be discussed without the intimacy of wine and candlelight. I'll meet you there, I replied instead. No car necessary. A pause then. As you wish. I look forward to seeing you again, Lily. Mrs. Chen noticed my distraction for the rest of the afternoon, but she didn't comment beyond a knowing smile when I asked to leave an hour early. I went home and changed 3 times before settling on a simple navy dress that felt professional enough for business, but appropriate for an expensive restaurant. The emerald dress from the auction was already at the dry cleaners, and besides, wearing it again felt like trying too hard. I arrived at Marconi's 10 minutes early, nervous energy making me pace the sidewalk outside until exactly 8. The restaurant occupied a converted brownstone, its entrance marked by a discreet brass plaque and a doorman who somehow managed to look both welcoming and intimidating in equal measure. Good evening, miss. Name for your reservation. I'm meeting Kieran Volkov, I said, hating how uncertain my voice sounded. The doorman's expression warmed immediately. Of course, Mr. Volkov is expecting you. Right this way, please. He led me through the main dining room, all white tablecloths and murmured conversations, and the subtle clink of expensive silverware, to a private alcove at the back. Kieran rose as I approached, and I was struck again by how he looked like he belonged in places like this. The charcoal suit he wore probably cost more than my monthly rent, but it was the way he carried himself that really sold the image. Confident without arrogance, powerful without being overbearing. Lily, thank you for coming. He held my chair, waited until I was seated before returning to his own. I wasn't certain you would. You said you had a proposition, I replied, accepting the menu the hovering waiter offered. I'm curious what it could be. Direct as always, I appreciate that quality. Kieran nodded to the waiter, who disappeared silently. I've been thinking about Friday's auction, about how naturally you interacted with the collectors. Several of them have contacted me specifically to ask when you'll be available for future consultations. Pride warmed my chest despite my determination to remain professional. Mrs. Chen mentioned some of them called the shop as well. I'm not surprised. You have a gift for making people trust you, for translating knowledge into something accessible without condescension. It's quite rare. He paused as the waiter returned with wine, red, expensive, poured with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious ceremonies. Which brings me to my proposition. I'd like to hire you as my permanent authentication consultant for all my events. Not just auctions, but private sales, estate evaluations, collection assessments. regular work, generous compensation, and access to pieces you'd never encounter otherwise. I stared at him, trying to process what he was offering. Permanent? As in leaving Mrs. Chen's shop? Not necessarily. This would be contract work, flexible scheduling around your current position. Though if you chose to transition to full-time consultation, I'd make it worth your while financially. He sipped his wine, watching my reaction carefully. You'd travel occasionally. London, Paris, Vienna, wherever the pieces are located. All expenses paid, of course, plus per diem and consultant fees that would exceed what you're currently making annually. It was too much, too good. The kind of opportunity that people spent years building toward, and he was offering it after a single successful event. Why me? I asked bluntly. You said yourself you have a team of experts with decades of experience. Why not use them? Because they're known quantities, predictable in their assessments and their loyalties. You're fresh, untainted by the politics and relationships that complicate this world. He set down his wine glass, leaning forward slightly. And because I enjoy working with you. Call it intuition, but I think we could build something interesting together. The phrasing made my skin prickle with awareness. Build something. In business terms, you mean? Of course. His smile suggested he knew exactly what I was thinking. What else would I mean? The waiter's return to take our orders saved me from answering. I ordered something at random, barely registering what it was, my mind racing with possibilities and dangers in equal measure. Working regularly with Kieran would mean money, security, access to a world I'd only dreamed about. But it would also mean continued exposure to whatever darkness lurked beneath his polished surface. The warnings Alexei had offered about broken things and collections that weren't allowed to leave. I need time to think about it, I said, once the waiter disappeared again. This is a significant decision. Take all the time you need. Kieran's tone was understanding, but something in his eyes suggested he already knew what my answer would be. Though I should mention that I have an estate assessment in London next week, a Tudor-era collection that's being liquidated by the family. If you're interested in observing before committing, you'd be welcome to join me. Consider it a working interview. London. I'd never been to Europe, had barely been outside the northeastern United States. The opportunity was staggering. All expenses paid? I asked, already knowing I was going to say yes, unable to stop myself despite every warning bell ringing in my head. Naturally, first-class flights, 5-star accommodations, 3 days in London with a day of sightseeing built in if you'd like. The assessment itself should only take a day, maybe 2, depending on the collection's size. Then yes, I heard myself say, I'll come to London. Kieran's smile was satisfied, victorious in a way that should have alarmed me. Excellent. I'll have Dimitri send you the details tomorrow. We leave Friday evening. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of exquisite food I barely tasted, and conversation that felt simultaneously easy and loaded with unspoken meaning. Kieran asked about my background, my grandmother who'd introduced me to antiques, my abandoned plans for graduate school that had died along with my relationship with Ryan. I found myself telling him things I rarely discussed, stories about my childhood spent in my grandmother's shop, learning to see value in objects others dismissed as junk. She sounds like she was remarkable, Kieran said softly, when I finished describing how my grandmother could spot a genuine piece in a room full of reproductions, just by the way light reflected off its surface. She was. The familiar ache of loss settled in my chest. She died 3 years ago, right before I met Ryan. I think if she'd been alive, she would have warned me about him, would have seen through his charm to what he really was. And what was that? I considered the question, swirling wine in my glass. Selfish. Not cruel, just fundamentally unable to think beyond his own wants and needs. He loved me as much as he was capable of loving anyone. But it wasn't enough. It would never have been enough. Love is complicated, Kieran said, something shadowed crossing his expression. We give it power it doesn't deserve. Convince ourselves it's enough to overcome incompatibility or fundamental differences in values. Usually, we're wrong. You sound like you're speaking from experience. I am. He didn't elaborate, and something in his tone suggested I shouldn't push. Instead, he signaled for the check, which appeared and disappeared without me ever seeing it, handled with such discretion that I couldn't even guess what our meal had cost. Come. Let me walk you home. That's not necessary, I protested. I can catch a cab. I insist. It's late, and your neighborhood isn't particularly safe at this hour. At my startled look, he added, I know where you live, Lily. I told you I researched you thoroughly before our first meeting. The reminder that he'd been investigating me sent a chill down my spine, but he was right about my neighborhood. The East Side wasn't dangerous exactly, but it wasn't the kind of place you wanted to walk alone after dark, especially not dressed in nice clothes. We walked in comfortable silence through streets that grew progressively less polished as we moved away from Marconi's refined district. Kieran seemed unbothered by the transition, his expensive suit and watch marks of wealth that should have made him a target. But something about the way he carried himself suggested he could handle trouble if it found him. When we reached my building, a 5-story walk-up with a perpetually broken intercom, I stopped on the sidewalk, suddenly self-conscious about the peeling paint and the graffiti on the mailboxes visible through the glass door. Thank you for dinner, I said. And for the opportunity in London. I'm looking forward to it. As am I. Kieran studied my building with an unreadable expression. This is where you live? Alone? Yes. It's not much, but it's mine. I pulled out my keys defensively. The rent is reasonable, and Mrs. Chen's shop is only 2 subway stops away. Reasonable. He repeated the word like it left a bad taste in his mouth. And safe? Safe enough. The lock works and my neighbors mostly mind their own business. I started toward the door, eager to escape before he could critique my living situation further. I should go. Early morning tomorrow. Lily. His hand caught my arm gently, turning me back toward him. If you're going to be working with me regularly, handling valuable pieces and meeting high-profile collectors, you'll need to live somewhere more secure, somewhere that doesn't advertise vulnerability. I stiffened. I can't afford anywhere else, not on what I make at the shop. Which is why the consultant fees I'm offering will change that. Consider it part of the compensation package. Housing assistance if you choose to relocate to a safer neighborhood. He released my arm, but his gaze held mine. I protect my investments, Lily, and you're becoming quite valuable to me. The phrasing echoed what Alexei had said about Kieran collecting things, about acquisitions that weren't allowed to leave. But before I could formulate a response, a familiar voice shattered the moment. Well, look who's slumming it in our neighborhood. Ryan stepped out of the shadows near my building's entrance, and my heart plummeted into my stomach. He looked worse than he had at the shop. Clothes rumpled, several days of stubble darkening his jaw, eyes bloodshot and wild. And he was swaying slightly, that telltale sign of being several drinks past sense. Ryan. I kept my voice carefully neutral. What are you doing here? Waiting for you. He lurched forward, and I instinctively stepped back, colliding with Kieran's solid presence. We need to talk, Lily. Really talk, without your boyfriend here to scare me off. I'm not her boyfriend, Kieran said mildly, though his hand had settled at my waist with that now familiar possessiveness. I'm her employer, and you're trespassing. Employer. Ryan's laugh was ugly, bitter. Right, because rich guys always walk their employees home and touch them like that, just for business reasons. His gaze fixed on me, pleading and aggressive in equal measure. Come on, Lily. You can't seriously be with a guy like him. Don't you know who he is? What he does? That's enough. Kieran's voice dropped to something dangerous, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Ms. Reyes has made it clear she doesn't wish to speak with you. I suggest you respect that decision and leave. Now. Or what? Ryan swayed forward another step, trying for intimidating and achieving pathetic. You'll have your goons rough me up? Break my legs? Isn't that what guys like you do when people don't cooperate? The tension in the air crystallized into something sharp and terrible. Kieran's hand on my waist tightened imperceptibly, and when he spoke, his accent was more pronounced, each word precisely enunciated. I don't need goons for this, Ryan, and I certainly don't need broken legs to make a point. He paused, letting the implied threat hang in the air. But I do need you to understand something very clearly. Lily is under my protection now. That means if anything happens to her, anything at all, I will hold you personally responsible. Do you understand? Ryan's face had gone pale, whatever drunken bravado he'd mustered evaporating under Kieran's cold stare. I just want to talk to her, that's all. Then make an appointment through proper channels, during business hours, with witnesses present. Kieran's tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. Any further attempts to contact her privately will be considered harassment, and I assure you, the consequences will be severe. For a long moment, Ryan just stood there, swaying and struggling to process what was happening. Then he looked at me, something desperate and broken in his expression. This is really what you want, Lily? To be some mob boss's property? I'm not anyone's property, I said quietly, though I wasn't entirely certain that was true anymore. But yes, I want you to leave me alone. That hasn't changed in 2 years, Ryan. It's not going to change now. He flinched like I'd struck him, then turned and stumbled away down the street, disappearing into the darkness with his shoulders hunched against some invisible weight. I watched him go, feeling a complicated mixture of relief, pity, and residual anger. Are you all right? Kieran's voice was gentle now, the dangerous edge gone. I'm fine. Thank you for... I gestured vaguely at where Ryan had been. For handling that. He won't bother you again, said with such certainty that I believed him absolutely. But Lily, you need to understand something. If you're going to work with me, there will be people who try to use you to get to me. Ex-boyfriends, business rivals, individuals with grudges. The security I mentioned isn't optional. It's necessary. Security. You mean bodyguards? The thought was absurd, laughable. I was nobody. Just a girl from a middle-class background working in an antique shop. That's excessive, don't you think? Not when you consider what I do, who I associate with, the value of the items you'll be handling. His hand came up to cup my cheek, the gesture startlingly intimate. And not when you consider how much I'd hate for anything to happen to you. The words hung between us, loaded with meaning I wasn't ready to unpack. I should have stepped back, should have maintained the professional distance I'd insisted on. Instead, I found myself leaning into his touch, drawn by the same magnetic pull I'd felt during that first kiss in Mrs. Chen's shop. Kieran, I whispered, unsure what I was asking for. He leaned down slowly, giving me time to pull away, to protest, to remember all the very good reasons this was a terrible idea. When I did none of those things, his mouth found mine in a kiss that was nothing like the strategic performance from before. This was real, deep, claiming in a way that made my knees weak and my heart race. His other hand came up to tangle in my hair, holding me in place while his tongue traced the seam of my lips, coaxing them apart. I opened for him, tasting wine and something darker, something that felt like danger and desire intertwined. My hands clutched at his suit jacket, pulling him closer, even as warning bells screamed in my head about boundaries and professional distance, and men who collected things they didn't let go. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kieran rested his forehead against mine. This wasn't part of the plan, he admitted, his voice rough. What plan? The one where I keep you at a professional distance and don't complicate things by wanting you. His thumb traced my lower lip, swollen from kissing. But plans change, and I find I'm not particularly interested in maintaining that distance anymore. I should have said no. Should have reminded him of my conditions, my insistence on keeping things professional. Instead, I heard myself asking, "What are you interested in?" His smile was slow, predatory, full of dark promise. Everything. I want everything with you, Lily, but I'm willing to be patient. For now. He stepped back, creating space between us that felt suddenly cold and empty. Go inside, lock your door, and think about London, about what working with me really means. We'll discuss it further when we're both thinking more clearly. I nodded mutely, not trusting my voice. He waited until I was inside the building, until I'd climbed the stairs to my third-floor apartment, and the door had closed behind me, before I heard his footsteps retreating down the sidewalk. Only then did I let myself collapse against the door, my hands shaking as I touched my lips where I could still feel the imprint of his kiss. What had I just agreed to? And more importantly, why did the danger of it all make my heart race with something that felt disturbingly like anticipation? The flight to London was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. When Kieran had said first class, I'd imagined slightly larger seats and maybe complimentary champagne. What I got was essentially a private suite with a bed that folded out, a personal entertainment system, and a flight attendant who addressed me by name and seemed to anticipate my needs before I voiced them. Kieran sat across from me, working on his laptop with the focused intensity I was beginning to recognize as his default state. He'd barely spoken since we'd met at the airport, beyond a polite greeting and confirmation that all my documents were in order. It was as if the kiss outside my apartment had never happened. As if he'd never told me he wanted everything with me. Maybe that was for the best. Maybe the distance would help me regain some perspective on the situation I'd stumbled into. You should rest, he said without looking up from his screen. We land at 7 a.m. London time, and the estate assessment begins at 9. I'll need you sharp. I'm too wired to sleep, I admitted, watching the darkness outside the window. Somewhere down there was the Atlantic Ocean, and beyond that, Europe. A continent I'd only seen in textbooks and documentaries. I've never been out of the country before. That made him look up, something like surprise crossing his features. Never. Unless you count a high school trip to Toronto, which I'm guessing you don't. I shifted in my absurdly comfortable seat. My family wasn't the traveling type. My parents worked factory jobs, saved every penny. The idea of flying across an ocean for fun would have seemed wasteful to them. And now? Now I'm doing it for work, which they would approve of slightly more, though they'd probably have concerns about my employer. I watched his reaction carefully. Ryan said some things the other night, about who you are, what you do. He seemed to think I should be afraid of you. Kieran set his laptop aside, giving me his full attention. Are you afraid? I don't know. Should I be? He considered the question, his gray eyes serious. That depends on your definition of fear, I suppose. I'm not going to hurt you, Lily. Not physically, not intentionally. But working with me means entering a world with its own rules, its own dangers. People like my brother Alexei, like Isabella. They're part of that world. They understand the costs. And I don't? Not yet, but you're learning. He paused. The Volkov family has been in the antiquities business for 3 generations. My grandfather started it in Russia before the revolution, dealing in art and artifacts that the nobility wanted to sell discreetly. When the Bolsheviks came, he fled to England with a fortune in portable wealth, jewelry, small paintings, icons. He rebuilt the business there, then expanded to France, to Italy, eventually back to Russia after the Soviet Union collapsed. That all sounds legitimate, I said carefully. Most of it is, but not all. When you deal in high-value portable goods, you inevitably encounter items with questionable provenance. Pieces that left their countries of origin through unofficial channels. Collections that were acquired during wartime under circumstances that wouldn't survive modern scrutiny. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I don't steal artifacts, Lily. I don't loot archaeological sites or rob museums, but I also don't ask too many questions when a seller's paperwork is imperfect, as long as the piece itself is genuine. That's still illegal, I pointed out. It's complicated. He smiled slightly. Welcome to the gray areas I mentioned. The pieces I handle would end up in private collections regardless. At least through me, they're preserved, authenticated, treated with respect. And occasionally, I facilitate their return to more appropriate institutions when the opportunity arises. Occasionally? More often than you'd think. The Napoleonic medals from last week's auction? 3 of them are going to French military museums as anonymous donations. The manuscript page will end up in a library in Bruges, where similar pages from that book of hours are already housed. Client 47 is actually a front for cultural repatriation efforts. I stared at him, trying to reconcile this information with my assumptions about his business. So you're what? Robin Hood for stolen art? Nothing so romantic. I'm a businessman who occasionally does the right thing when it aligns with my interests. He picked up his laptop again, signaling the end of the conversation. Now get some rest. Tomorrow will be demanding. But sleep wouldn't come despite the comfortable seat and the gentle hum of the engines. My mind kept churning through what Kieran had revealed, trying to decide if it made him better or worse than I'd feared. Gray areas, he'd called them, but gray could conceal anything. I must have dozed eventually, because I woke to Kieran shaking my shoulder gently, his face close to mine in the dim cabin lighting. We're landing soon, he murmured. You should see this. I sat up, disoriented, and looked where he was pointing. Dawn was breaking over London, painting the city in shades of rose and gold. The Thames snaked through the urban landscape like a ribbon, and I could make out landmarks I'd only seen in pictures. Tower Bridge, the Dome of St. Paul's, the London Eye catching the first rays of sun. It's beautiful, I breathed. It is. But when I glanced at Kieran, he wasn't looking at the view. He was looking at me, something soft in his expression that vanished the moment he noticed my attention. Come, we need to prepare for landing. The Tudor estate was located in Kent, about an hour's drive from London proper. A car and driver were waiting for us at Heathrow, not Anton this time, but a British man named James, who handled our luggage with efficient professionalism and navigated the left side driving with ease that made me nervous watching from the back seat. Kieran spent the drive on his phone, conducting business in 3 different languages: English, Russian, and what I thought might be Italian. I watched the countryside roll past, still adjusting to the reality of being in a different country, on a different continent, doing work I'd never imagined possible a month ago. The estate appeared gradually, first as a stone wall lining the road, then as formal gates that James opened with a code, finally as the house itself, a sprawling Tudor manor in honey-colored stone with mullioned windows and chimneys that reached toward the cloudy sky like prayers-made architecture. My God, I whispered. Impressive, isn't it? Kieran put away his phone. Built in 1543 by the Howard family, passed down through generations until the current heir decided he'd rather have cash than history. Our job is to assess what's worth selling and advise on the best methods to do so. A woman in her 60s met us at the entrance, Lady Elizabeth Howard, the current owner's aunt, who'd been tasked with managing the liquidation. She was elegant in that particularly British way, all pearls and cashmere and a voice that could cut glass with its precise diction. Mr. Volkov, punctual as always. She shook Kieran's hand, then turned to me with undisguised curiosity. And this must be your authentication specialist. You look rather young, dear. Age doesn't always correlate with expertise, Kieran said smoothly. Ms. Reyes has an exceptional eye and knowledge that exceeds many professionals twice her age. You'll see. Lady Elizabeth's skepticism was palpable, but she led us through the house to what she called the collection rooms, a series of chambers that housed 4 centuries of accumulated treasures. Paintings lined the walls in dense arrangements, furniture from various periods crowded every available space, and display cases held everything from medieval weapons to Georgian silverware to what looked like genuine Viking artifacts. "Where would you like to begin?" Lady Elizabeth asked, gesturing at the overwhelming array. Kieran looked at me, waiting. This was a test, I realized. Not just of my knowledge, but of my confidence, my ability to handle myself in front of clients like Lady Elizabeth, who already doubted me. I moved to the nearest display case, studying the items arranged within. "The Viking pieces," I said. "They're the most valuable and the most likely to be fakes. We should authenticate those first, establish a baseline for the collection's overall quality." Something like approval flickered in Kieran's eyes. Lady Elizabeth simply nodded, though her skepticism hadn't fully evaporated. The next 6 hours passed in intense concentration. I examined each artifact methodically, checking for signs of age, analyzing construction methods, comparing styles to known examples from my mental database of historical research. Kieran assisted with documentation, photographing pieces from multiple angles while I dictated notes about authenticity and condition. The Viking artifacts were genuine: a drinking horn with silver mounts, 3 brooches with intricate knotwork, a small statue of what I thought might be Thor. The medieval weapons were more mixed, about half authentic and half Victorian reproductions. The paintings included 2 Gainsboroughs, a possible Stubbs that would need scientific analysis to confirm, and several minor works by lesser-known artists. By mid-afternoon, I'd worked through 3 of the collection rooms and made preliminary assessments that Kieran seemed satisfied with. Lady Elizabeth had warmed considerably, especially after I identified a Victorian reproduction she'd thought was medieval as actually being more valuable than she'd assumed. It was crafted by a famous forger, whose work now commanded premium prices. "You do have a good eye," she admitted grudgingly. "Mr. Volkov chose well." "He tends to," I replied, catching Kieran's slight smile. We broke for tea, actual British tea service with sandwiches and scones and proper china, in a morning room overlooking the gardens. Lady Elizabeth excused herself to take a phone call, leaving Kieran and me alone with our Earl Grey and cucumber sandwiches. "You're impressing her," Kieran observed. "Not an easy feat. Lady Elizabeth has very high standards. She reminds me of my grandmother, actually. Same no-nonsense attitude about quality and authenticity." I bit into a scone, the buttery texture dissolving on my tongue. "This is incredible. I could get used to this. Working internationally? Or the lifestyle that comes with it? Both, maybe. Though I'm trying not to let it go to my head." I gestured at the opulent room, the priceless paintings on the walls. "This isn't normal for me. None of this is normal." "It could be." Kieran set down his teacup, his gaze direct. "If you accept my offer. Regular work like this, access to collections most people never see, the chance to handle pieces that belong in museums. All of it could be your normal." "In exchange for what?" I asked quietly. "There's always an exchange, Kieran. What do you get out of this besides competent authentication services?" "The pleasure of your company." He said it lightly, but something in his eyes suggested he meant it. "And yes, professional benefits. Collectors who trust you, access to networks through your connections, the legitimacy your honest assessments bring to my operations. But also, Lily, I enjoy working with you. Enjoy watching you interact with pieces you love. Enjoy the way your entire face lights up when you discover something unexpected." Heat flooded my cheeks. "That's not very professional." "No," he agreed. "It's not. But I find I care less about professionalism where you're concerned than I probably should." Before I could respond, Lady Elizabeth returned, and the moment dissolved. We spent the rest of the afternoon completing the assessment, documenting hundreds of items that would eventually go to auction. By the time we finished, twilight was falling, painting the Tudor manor in shades of purple and gold. "Thank you both," Lady Elizabeth said at the entrance as James loaded our bags into the car. "This has been most illuminating. I'll await your full report, Mr. Volkov, and I hope we'll work together on the auction itself." "Absolutely. I'll have Dmitri contact you next week with proposals." Kieran shook her hand, then guided me toward the waiting car. "Shall we? We have dinner reservations in London." The drive back to the city passed in comfortable silence. I was exhausted from the day's concentration, my eyes aching from examining fine details in less than ideal lighting. But I was also exhilarated in a way I hadn't felt since my grandmother was alive, teaching me to see what others missed. Our hotel was in Mayfair, all understated elegance and discreet service. The suite Kieran had reserved, suite, not room, was larger than my entire apartment, with a sitting area, a bedroom with a bed big enough for 4 people, and a bathroom with a tub deep enough to swim in. "This is too much," I protested as the porter deposited my single suitcase. "It's what was available on short notice," Kieran replied, tipping the porter generously. "I'm in the adjoining suite if you need anything. We have reservations at 8 at a restaurant near Covent Garden. Dress casually. It's more relaxed than Marconi's." After he left, I explored the suite with growing amazement. Fresh flowers on every surface, a view over Hyde Park, toiletries from brands I'd only read about in magazines, a minibar stocked with champagne and chocolates. I texted Mrs. Chen a photo of the view with a caption about the assessment going well, then collapsed onto the bed that felt like sleeping on a cloud. "Just for a minute," I told myself. Just a quick rest before getting ready for dinner. I woke to knocking at the door and darkness outside the windows. Disoriented, I stumbled to the door and found Kieran standing there, concern creasing his forehead. "Are you all right? You didn't answer your phone." I glanced at the clock on the bedside table. 8:30. "Oh God, I'm so sorry." I laid down for a minute and just completely passed out. His expression softened. "You're exhausted. We've been working for 12 hours. Dinner can wait, or we can order room service if you'd prefer." "No, I want to go out. Just give me 20 minutes to make myself presentable." I was already backing toward the bathroom. "I promise I'll be quick." I showered in record time, threw on the only casual dress I'd packed, and managed something approximating makeup before emerging to find Kieran waiting patiently on the sofa, scrolling through his phone. "Ready," I announced. He looked up, and something in his expression made my breath catch. Appreciation, desire, something warmer than professional interest. "You look beautiful." I look like I just woke up, because I did. Still beautiful. He rose, offering his arm. "Come, let's get you fed properly." The restaurant was tucked down a cobblestone alley in Covent Garden, the kind of place only locals would know about. We ate fish and chips and drank beer and talked about everything except work, my childhood, his travels, favorite books, the places we'd like to see someday. It felt like a date. Felt like 2 people getting to know each other without the complications of business and boundaries and questionable ethics. For a few hours, I let myself forget about gray areas and warnings from his brother and ex-boyfriends who appeared in dark alleys. Walking back to the hotel through London's lamplit streets, Kieran's hand found mine, and I didn't pull away. Didn't remind him about professional distance or appropriate behavior. I just held on, letting myself enjoy the simple pleasure of connection. At my suite door, he paused. "Thank you for today. You exceeded every expectation." "Thank you for bringing me. This has been incredible." He leaned down slowly, giving me time to retreat. When I didn't, his mouth found mine in a kiss that was gentle, searching, full of restrained want. I kissed him back, my hands coming up to rest on his chest where I could feel his heart beating as fast as mine. "Lily," he murmured against my lips. "Tell me to leave. Tell me this is too fast, too complicated." "It is," I whispered. "All of that. But I don't want you to leave." The admission felt like stepping off a cliff. I should, but I don't. His smile was slow, dangerous, beautiful. "Then I won't." He backed me against the door, his body pressing mine into the solid wood as his mouth claimed mine more thoroughly. My hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, and when his knee pressed between my thighs, I gasped against his mouth. "Inside," he growled. "Now. Before I forget we're in a hallway." I fumbled with the key card, my hands shaking too much to get it into the slot on the first try. Kieran's mouth was on my neck, teeth grazing sensitive skin, making coherent thought nearly impossible. Finally, the door opened, and we stumbled into the suite, shedding clothes between the entrance and the bedroom. His shirt, my dress, shoes kicked off and abandoned. By the time we reached the enormous bed, we were down to underwear and desperation. "Tell me you want this," Kieran demanded, hovering over me, his weight braced on his arms. "Tell me you're sure." "I'm not sure about anything," I admitted, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. "But I want you anyway." Well, that was apparently the answer he needed. What followed was intense, overwhelming, everything I'd been denying wanting since that first kiss in Mrs. Chen's shop. Kieran was focused, attentive, learning what made me gasp and moan and arch against him with the same methodical precision he brought to everything else. Afterward, tangled in expensive sheets with my head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow to something approaching normal, I felt the weight of what we'd just done settling over me. "This changes everything," I said quietly. His arm tightened around me. "Does it have to? We work together. I can't be objective about authenticating your pieces if we're..." I gestured at our naked bodies. "If we're this. Then we keep it separate. Business is business. This is this." He tilted my chin up, forcing me to meet his eyes. "I won't let what's between us compromise your professional integrity, and I won't use our personal relationship to influence your assessments. Can you really keep those worlds separate? I've been doing it for years." His smile was slightly bitter. "Besides, Isabella and I were involved for months while working together. If I could maintain professional boundaries with her, I can certainly do it with you." Isabella, the reminder of his ex-lover felt like cold water. "You never told me what happened between you two." She wanted more than I could give. Power, position, permanence. I wanted her expertise and her body in that order. Eventually, the discrepancy became untenable. Sounds romantic. It was honest, which is more than most relationships can claim. He pulled me closer, his nose buried in my hair. "With you, I want to try for something different. Something real, if you'll let me." I should have said no. Should have recognized this for the complication it was. Instead, I nestled into his warmth and let myself believe, just for tonight, that wanting could be enough. We returned to New York on Monday afternoon, and reality reasserted itself with uncomfortable speed. The magical bubble of London, the Tudor estate, the expensive dinners, the night we'd spent tangled in hotel sheets, evaporated the moment we stepped back into the familiar chaos of JFK Airport. Kieran had meetings scheduled immediately, so Anton drove me straight home to my shabby apartment that felt even smaller and more depressing after the luxury of the Mayfair Hotel. I unpacked mechanically, trying to process everything that had happened, everything that had changed. My phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chen. "Welcome back. How was London? Need you tomorrow if possible. Estate sale treasures to catalog." And just like that, I was back to being regular Lily, who worked in an antique shop, not the version who flew first class to Europe and authenticated Tudor collections and slept with dangerous, complicated men who dealt in gray areas. The problem was, I wasn't sure which version was real anymore. Over the next 2 weeks, I settled into a strange double life. Days, I worked at Ambridge Antiques, cataloging Victorian jewelry and explaining the difference between genuine Art Nouveau and reproductions to customers who mostly couldn't afford either. Evenings and weekends, I consulted for Kieran, authenticating pieces for upcoming auctions, researching provenance for private sales, occasionally accompanying him to estate assessments in Connecticut and upstate New York. We were careful to maintain professional boundaries in public. No touching beyond what was necessary. No lingering looks. Nothing that would suggest our relationship was anything more than business. But in private, behind closed doors, we were something else entirely. Intense. Consuming. Complicated in ways I didn't know how to articulate even to myself. I told myself it was just physical. Just the thrill of newness and the intoxication of finally feeling wanted after 2 years of rebuilding myself piece by piece. But then Kieran would do something like remember how I took my coffee, or text me articles about newly discovered Tudor artifacts, and I'd feel something shift in my chest that had nothing to do with physical attraction. I was falling for him. Despite every warning, despite every red flag, I was falling hard. "You're glowing," Mrs. Chen observed one afternoon, her sharp eyes missing nothing as I catalogued a collection of vintage brooches. "This work with Mr. Volkov, it agrees with you." "It's fascinating," I admitted, which was true, if not the whole truth. "I'm learning so much, seeing pieces I never would have encountered otherwise." "And the travel? Not too overwhelming?" "Actually, I love it. Seeing different places, working with different collections. It's expanded my entire perspective on what's possible in this field." I set down a particularly beautiful Art Deco piece, a starburst design in diamonds and platinum. "Mrs. Chen, I need to talk to you about something." She set down the inventory sheet she'd been reviewing. "You're leaving. Not immediately, but yes, eventually." The words felt both liberating and terrifying. "Kieran has offered me a permanent position as his primary authentication consultant. The pay is significantly more than I make here, and the opportunity to work with high-value pieces, to build a reputation in the international market. It's everything I've been working toward." Mrs. Chen nodded slowly, unsurprised. "I suspected this was coming. Mr. Volkov is not a man who shares easily. If he wants your expertise exclusively, he'll ensure he has it. I feel terrible leaving you, after everything you've done for me." "Stop." She held up a hand. "I hired you 2 years ago because I saw potential. Now that potential is being recognized by someone with far more resources and connections than I have, I would be a fool to stand in your way, and a worse friend." Tears pricked my eyes. "You've been more than an employer. You gave me a purpose when I needed one desperately. And now you have a new purpose. One that will take you places I never could." She came around the counter to take my hands. "But Lily, be careful. The world Mr. Volkov inhabits, it's not always kind to outsiders. And it's not always honest, even when it appears to be." The warning lingered with me as I finished my shift and headed home. Mrs. Chen wasn't the first person to caution me about Kieran, about the dangers of getting too close to a man whose business dealings existed in moral gray areas. But she was the first who knew me well enough to understand that I was already in too deep to extract myself easily. My phone rang as I climbed the stairs to my apartment. Kieran's name lit up the screen. "Hi," I answered, fumbling with my keys. "Are you home?" His voice was tight, controlled in a way that set off alarm bells. "Just getting there now. Why? What's wrong?" "Don't go inside. Turn around and leave the building. Anton is 2 minutes away. He'll pick you up." My hand froze on the doorknob. "Kieran, you're scaring me. What's happened?" "Your apartment was broken into. Anton noticed the door was ajar when he drove by on his way to pick me up from a meeting nearby. He checked the perimeter and called the police, but we need you away from there until we know it's secure. The bottom dropped out of my stomach. Someone broke into my apartment? Why? I don't have anything valuable. I don't know yet. That's what we're going to find out. But Lily, until we do, you're not staying there. It's not safe. I wanted to argue, to insist on seeing the damage myself, but the edge in Kieran's voice suggested this wasn't negotiable. Instead, I retreated back down the stairs, just as the black Mercedes pulled up at the curb. The next 3 hours were a blur of police reports and insurance claims, and explanations I couldn't quite provide. Yes, I lived alone. No, I didn't have enemies. No, I hadn't noticed anyone suspicious in the building recently. The robbery appeared random. Electronics gone, some jewelry I'd left on my dresser, cash from a jar in my kitchen. Typical opportunistic burglary, the responding officers assured me. Except my door hadn't been forced. Someone had used a key or picked the lock with professional skill. And according to the building supervisor, no other apartments had been hit, just mine. Not random, Kieran said flatly when the police finally left. We were standing in my ransacked apartment, surveying the damage. Drawers pulled out, cushions overturned, books swept from shelves. Someone was looking for something specific. But what? I don't have anything anyone would want. I picked up a photo frame that had been knocked to the floor, my grandmother and me at her shop, both of us grinning at the camera. Miraculously, the glass hadn't broken. Unless, Kieran prompted. Unless it has something to do with your work, with the authentication services. I looked at him, seeing my own suspicion reflected in his eyes. Someone who thinks I might have information about pieces you handle, or documentation, or who wants to send me a message through you. His jaw tightened. This is exactly what I was worried about. Why I wanted you in a more secure location. You think someone targeted me because of you? I think someone wanted to intimidate you, make you feel vulnerable, possibly plant surveillance equipment while making it look like a standard burglary. He pulled out his phone. I'm having a team sweep this place for bugs and cameras. In the meantime, you're not staying here. Where am I supposed to go? A hotel? The thought of spending my savings on hotel rooms made me want to cry. My penthouse. I have guest rooms. You'll have complete privacy, but the building has 24-hour security, doormen who actually pay attention, and technology that makes unauthorized entry virtually impossible. I opened my mouth to refuse, to insist I could handle this myself. Then I looked around at my violated space, at the evidence that someone had touched all my things, invaded my private sanctuary. The thought of sleeping here, of lying in that bed, knowing someone had been rifling through my belongings, made my skin crawl, just until I can find a new place, I heard myself say. Maybe a week, 2 at most. Kieran's expression suggested he thought it would be longer than that, but he simply nodded. Pack what you need. Everything else can be dealt with later. By midnight, I was installed in one of Kieran's guest rooms, a space 3 times the size of my entire apartment, with its own bathroom and a view of the city that would have been breathtaking if I'd had the energy to appreciate it. Kieran had left me alone after showing me where everything was, respecting my need for space to process. I sat on the edge of the bed, still fully clothed, trying to decide if I should unpack, or if that would feel too much like admitting this was more than temporary. A soft knock made me look up. Kieran stood in the doorway, changed into casual clothes, jeans and a worn t-shirt that made him look younger, less intimidating. I made tea, he said, holding up 2 mugs. Thought you might want some. Tea, because that's going to fix everything. But I accepted the mug anyway, letting the warmth seep into my cold hands. He sat beside me, close but not touching. I'm sorry this happened. I should have insisted on better security sooner. This isn't your fault. Isn't it? You said yourself. This might be connected to my work, to people who want to use you to get to me. His voice was tight with suppressed anger. You were right to be cautious about working with me. I've put you in danger. We don't know that for certain. The police think it was just random. The police are wrong. He set his mug down with controlled force. Lily, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you weeks ago. My stomach clenched with dread. What? Ryan's gambling debts. They're significant, and some of them are owed to people connected to the less legitimate aspects of my world. When he saw us together at your apartment that night, when he recognized me, he may have told others. People who might think you're valuable to me. How valuable? My voice came out small. Very. He turned to face me fully. Because you are. This isn't just about work anymore, Lily. What I feel for you, it's complicated everything. Kieran, let me finish. His hand found mine, fingers intertwining. I've been in this business long enough to know when someone's being targeted for leverage. The break-in wasn't about stealing your things. It was about demonstrating access, showing that you're vulnerable. If Ryan's creditors think I care about you, and I do, more than is probably wise, they might try to use you to negotiate his debts. The implications settled over me like a shroud. How much does he owe? 50,000, maybe more by now, with interest. At my shocked expression, he nodded grimly. Your ex-boyfriend has expensive habits and poor judgment about where to indulge them. $50,000, an amount Ryan could never repay on whatever salary he made. An amount that turned me from a person into a bargaining chip. What do we do? I asked, hating how helpless I sounded. We make you impossible to reach. You stay here where security is absolute. You don't go anywhere alone. And we consider going public with our relationship. Make it clear that harming you would bring down consequences no one wants to face. Go public. You mean like an actual couple? Isn't that what we are? His thumb traced circles on the back of my hand. Or have I misread this situation entirely? No. I mean, yes, we're something. But Kieran, I don't know if I can handle being publicly associated with you, with what people think you are. And what do people think I am? A criminal. Someone who operates outside the law, who's connected to dangerous people, who hurts those who cross him. I met his eyes. Are they wrong? He was quiet for a long moment. No, they're not entirely wrong. I've done things I'm not proud of, Lily. Made compromises with morality that seemed justified at the time. I've worked with people who have blood on their hands, facilitated transactions that weren't entirely legal. But I've never killed anyone, never deliberately harmed an innocent person. And I've tried, in my own way, to do more good than harm. That's a pretty low bar for moral justification. It's the best I can offer. His hand tightened on mine. I'm not asking you to approve of everything I've done. I'm asking if you can accept me as I am, complications and all. Because I'm in love with you, and I don't know how to make that uncomplicated. The words hung in the air between us, weighted with meaning I wasn't ready to process. He loved me. This dangerous, complicated man who'd swept into my life barely 2 months ago loved me. Kieran, My phone buzzed insistently on the nightstand, Ryan's name flashing on the screen. We both stared at it for a moment before I answered, putting it on speaker so Kieran could hear. Lily, thank God. Listen, I'm in trouble. I need your help. And I know you're going to be mad, but... What have you done, Ryan? I asked, my voice flat. It's not what I've done. It's what I owe. These guys I've been borrowing from, they want their money, and they think since you're with Volkov now, you can get it for them. 50,000, Lily. If you could just ask him. I'm not asking him anything. Fury was replacing fear, hot and clarifying. You don't get to put this on me. You don't get to gamble yourself into debt and then use me as collateral. They broke into your apartment. They're not playing, Lily. If I don't get them their money, they're going to hurt both of us. Please, just talk to him. Volkov has that kind of cash lying around. It's nothing to him. Kieran took the phone from my hand, his expression cold as winter. Ryan, this is Kieran Volkov. We need to talk. Mr. Volkov, sir, I'm so sorry about all this. I never meant for Lily to get involved. But these guys, they're serious. And I thought maybe if you could see your way to helping out. Who do you owe the money to? Names. A pause. I can't say on the phone. But if we could meet... You'll meet me tomorrow, noon, the coffee shop across from St. Michael's Church. You'll bring documentation of all your debts, every penny you owe and to whom. And then we'll discuss how to keep Lily out of your catastrophically poor decisions. Thank you, Mr. Volkov. Thank you so much. Kieran hung up without responding. He handed my phone back with controlled precision, but I could see the anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. You're going to pay his debts, I said quietly. I'm going to negotiate his debts, which is different. And yes, probably, I'll end up paying some amount to protect you from the fallout. He stood, pacing to the window. But Ryan will work off every penny, even if it takes him years. He doesn't get to walk away from this consequence free. What will you have him do? Whatever I decide is appropriate. The coldness in his voice reminded me exactly who I was dealing with. Don't waste sympathy on him, Lily. He knew what he was risking when he gambled with that money. Knew those people didn't forgive debts. And when it came down to it, he was willing to sacrifice you to save himself. The truth of that statement hurt more than it should have. After everything Ryan had done, every betrayal, I still hadn't fully accepted how little I'd actually meant to him. Come here, Kieran said softly, and I went, letting him pull me into an embrace that felt like the only solid thing in a world that kept shifting beneath my feet. I will keep you safe. Whatever it takes, whoever I have to pay or threaten or destroy, you will be safe. I should have been frightened by the intensity of his promise, by the implicit violence it contained. Instead, I felt something loosen in my chest, some knot of fear finally releasing. I love you too, I whispered against his shirt. I'm terrified, and it's probably a terrible idea, but I love you. His arms tightened around me. It is a terrible idea, but I find I don't care anymore. We stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the expensive guest room, while the city glittered outside the window. Tomorrow would bring meetings with Ryan, and negotiations with dangerous creditors, and decisions about how public to make our relationship. But tonight, I let myself believe that love might actually be enough to navigate the complicated, dangerous world I'd somehow become part of, even if history and common sense suggested otherwise. The meeting with Ryan happened as scheduled, in the coffee shop across from St. Michael's Church, where I'd sought sanctuary the night of the auction. Kieran insisted I come along, said it was important that Ryan understand I wasn't just a passive victim in this situation, but an active participant in its resolution. Father Thomas was there too, at my request. If we were going to negotiate with dangerous people about blood debts, I wanted someone present who represented something other than violence and moral compromise. The priest had agreed immediately, his weathered face grave, but unsurprised when I'd explained the situation over the phone. Ryan looked terrible when he arrived, hollow-eyed and unshaven, wearing the same clothes I'd seen him in a week ago. He flinched when he saw Kieran, but his gaze on me was pleading, desperate. Lily, thank you for coming. I know I don't deserve... You're right, you don't. I kept my voice level, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing how much this hurt. Sit down. Let's get this over with. We arranged ourselves around a corner table. Kieran positioned himself between Ryan and me, a physical barrier that felt both protective and possessive. Father Thomas sat across from us, his presence a reminder of the moral stakes everyone else seemed eager to ignore. "Documentation," Kieran said without preamble, extending his hand. Ryan fumbled with a crumpled envelope, producing several pieces of paper covered in scrawled numbers and names. Kieran scanned them with professional efficiency, his expression darkening with each page. 73,000 total, he said finally. Owed to 3 different operations, one of which, he tapped a particular line, is run by Dmitry Sokolov, my assistant. Ryan's face went white. "I didn't know. I swear I had no idea he worked for you." "That's because you don't think, Ryan. You never have." Kieran's voice was controlled, deadly quiet. "Dmitry came to me last week, told me one of his regular debtors had been bragging about his connection to my girlfriend. He asked if he should adjust the collection approach accordingly. I told him to proceed normally, thinking you'd learn a valuable lesson about consequences." "I'm learning," Ryan said frantically. "I'm learning, I promise. I'll never gamble again. I'll pay back every penny." "How?" I interrupted. "With what money? What job do you even have right now?" His silence was answer enough. Whatever employment he'd maintained after our breakup had apparently fallen apart along with everything else. "Here's what's going to happen," Kieran said, pulling out his own paperwork, official-looking documents that he laid out with precise care. "I'm purchasing all 3 of your debts. As of now, you owe me $73,000 plus 15% interest annually until paid in full." Ryan's eyes widened. 15%? That's less than what you were paying your other creditors. Significantly less in some cases. Kieran's expression was implacable. "In exchange, you'll work for me. Legitimate work, before you ask. I have properties that need management, deliveries that need handling, paperwork that needs filing. Minimum wage, 40 hours per week, with every penny above subsistence costs going toward your debt." "How long will it take me to pay that back?" Ryan asked, his voice small. Kieran pulled out a calculator, tapped in numbers. "At minimum wage, after taxes and allowing for basic living expenses, approximately 8 years, assuming you don't miss any payments or incur additional debts." 8 years. I watched the numbers sink into Ryan's consciousness, watched him realize the full weight of what he'd done to himself. Part of me felt pity. Most of me felt grim satisfaction. "And if I refuse?" Ryan asked, though we all knew he wouldn't. "Then I sell your debts back to their original holders. Dmitry's organization is professional but firm. The other 2, Kieran shrugged. "Less concerned with legal niceties. Your choice." "I'll work for you." Ryan's shoulders slumped in defeat. "Whatever you want. Just please, keep Lily safe from all this. None of this is her fault." "I'm aware." Kieran's hand found mine under the table, squeezing once. "Which is why the terms include a restraining order. You'll have no contact with Lily unless she initiates it. You won't approach her building, her workplace, or any location you have reason to believe she might be. Violation results in immediate transfer of your debts back to the original holders." "I understand. One more thing." Kieran's voice dropped to something dangerous. "If anything happens to Lily, anything at all, accident or otherwise, I will hold you personally responsible. Do you understand what that means?" Ryan nodded quickly, too quickly, fear written plainly across his face. Father Thomas shifted uncomfortably, clearly troubled by the implicit threat, but he said nothing. Perhaps he recognized, as I had, that this was as close to mercy as Ryan was going to get in this situation. The paperwork was signed, witnessed by Father Thomas, and filed away in Kieran's briefcase. Ryan left looking like a man who'd narrowly escaped execution, only to face a different kind of prison. Father Thomas lingered, his expression concerned as he looked between Kieran and me. "Are you truly all right, Lily?" he asked gently. "Because if you need help, if this situation—" "I'm fine, Father. Really." I squeezed his hand. Thank you for being here, for witnessing this. Mr. Volkov. Father Thomas turned his attention to Kieran. I appreciate your handling of this situation with relative restraint, but I must ask, what kind of future are you building with Lily? One where violence and threats are the first response to problems? Violence is sometimes necessary, Father. Surely your own history recognizes that. Kieran's tone was respectful, but firm. I'm building a future where Lily is safe, protected, free to pursue her passion without fear. Whatever that requires, I'll provide. Even if she wants freedom from you? The question hung in the air, loaded. Kieran's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on mine. If Lily ever wants to leave, she can. I won't stop her. He met Father Thomas's gaze directly. But I will do everything in my power to convince her to stay. That's not a threat, Father. It's a promise. After the priest left, Kieran and I sat in silence for a long moment, processing what had just happened. The coffee shop bustled around us, oblivious to the life-changing negotiations that had just concluded at our corner table. 8 years, I said finally. You've bound Ryan to you for 8 years. I've given him a path to redemption. More than he deserved. Kieran's thumb traced circles on the back of my hand. And I've ensured he can never use you as a pawn again. That's worth 8 years of his mediocre labor. Is this what your world is always like? Debts and obligations and people bound to each other through contracts written in fear? Sometimes, but also partnerships built on mutual benefit. Trust earned through consistent action, loyalty rewarded with protection and opportunity. He turned to face me fully. Lily, I know you're struggling with what I am, what my life entails, but I need you to understand something. Everything I've done since meeting you has been to keep you safe while giving you room to grow, to be the person you want to be. Even if that person doesn't want to be involved with someone who operates in gray areas, even then. His voice was steady, certain. Though I'd be lying if I said I wouldn't fight to keep you. Would try to show you that the gray areas aren't always as dark as they appear. I thought about the past 2 months, the fear and the exhilaration, the way my world had expanded beyond anything I'd imagined possible. The Tudor estate, the European collectors, the access to pieces that belonged in museums, the feeling of being cherished, protected, valued not just for my expertise, but for who I was. And yes, the darkness too, the warnings from Alexei, the jealousy from Isabella, the break-in at my apartment, Ryan's debts that had nearly pulled me under with him. I'm moving in with you, I said abruptly. Not to your guest room, to your bedroom, your life, all of it. If I'm going to be part of this world, I'm doing it fully. No more half measures. Kieran's eyes widened, something like hope and victory mixing in their depths. Are you sure? No. But I'm sure I love you. Sure that what we have is worth the risk. I leaned forward, resting my forehead against his. Just promise me one thing. Anything. Promise me we'll build something legitimate together. That the gray areas will keep getting lighter, not darker. I can't spend my life looking over my shoulder, wondering which of your business associates might decide I'm useful leverage. I promise. He kissed me softly, a seal on the vow. I've actually been working on something, a legitimate auction house, completely above board, specializing in pieces with impeccable provenance. I was going to wait until it was further along to tell you, but I want you to run it with me. Equal partners in every sense. An auction house? My mind was already racing with possibilities. Specializing in what, exactly? Whatever you think the market needs. Whatever you're passionate about. He pulled out his phone, showing me architectural renderings of a beautiful space in Lower Manhattan. I purchased the building 6 months ago. Been renovating it slowly, trying to decide exactly what I wanted it to be. Now I know. You're doing this for me? I'm doing this for us. And because you're right, the gray areas need to get lighter. I've been moving in that direction for years, trying to legitimize more of my operations. You're giving me the motivation to accelerate that process. Over the next 3 months, we built something extraordinary. The auction house, Reyes and Volkov Fine Antiquities, opened in February to immediate acclaim. Our first auction featured the Tudor estate pieces we'd assessed in London, along with several collections Kieran had been holding for exactly this purpose. I discovered I had a gift for curating, for selecting pieces that told stories and attracted serious collectors. Kieran's connections brought in consignments from across Europe, each one meticulously documented, each provenance researched until I was satisfied of its legitimacy. Mrs. Chen attended the opening, beaming with pride. "I knew you had it in you," she said, surveying the elegant space packed with wealthy collectors and museum representatives. "Your grandmother would be so proud." Isabella showed up too, impeccably dressed and trailing a new partner, some French industrialist who apparently collected Napoleonic artifacts. She congratulated us both with perfect politeness, though the look she gave me was knowing, assessing. "He's never done this for anyone before," she said when Kieran was occupied across the room. "Built something from scratch, made himself vulnerable through legitimate business that can actually be audited and scrutinized. You must be quite special." "I'd like to think we're special together," I replied carefully. "Perhaps." She sipped her champagne thoughtfully. "Just remember that men like Kieran, they collect things, beautiful things, rare things, and they don't handle it well when their collections try to leave." The warning echoed Alexi's from months ago, but I pushed it aside. Kieran had proven himself repeatedly, shown me through action that he valued my independence as much as my presence. When a museum in Vienna offered me a position as their antiquities consultant, he'd encouraged me to consider it, even begun making plans for how we could manage a transatlantic relationship if necessary. I turned it down, not because Kieran asked me to, but because I'd realized I wanted to build something here with him more than I wanted any other opportunity. In June, on the anniversary of our first meeting, Kieran took me back to Mrs. Chen's shop. She'd agreed to close early for a private viewing, though her knowing smile suggested she knew exactly what was actually happening. "This is where it started," Kieran said, standing in the same spot where he'd first kissed me to chase away Ryan. "Where you bumped into me while fleeing from your past, and I saw your future written across your face." "You saw my future?" I laughed softly. "That's pretty presumptuous. I saw a possibility, potential. A woman who could handle herself in my world while maintaining the integrity that's always been in short supply there." He dropped to one knee, and my heart stopped. I saw the person I wanted to build a life with, if she'd have me. The ring he produced was Victorian, naturally. A sapphire surrounded by diamonds, the kind of piece I would have catalogued and authenticated hundreds of times without recognizing its personal significance. Until now. "Lily Reyes, will you marry me? Will you continue building this life we've started, making the gray areas lighter together, creating something legitimate and real that we can be proud of?" I looked down at him. This dangerous, complicated man who'd upended my life and rebuilt it into something better than I'd ever imagined possible. At the shop where I'd hidden from my past and stumbled into my future. At Mrs. Chen, watching from the doorway with tears in her eyes. "Yes," I said, dropping to my knees so we were eye level. "Yes, I'll marry you. I'll keep building with you. I'll be your partner in everything." He slid the ring onto my finger, and it fit perfectly. Of course it did. Kieran was nothing if not thorough in his research, his planning, his approach to acquiring what he wanted. But as he pulled me into a kiss that tasted like promises and possibility, I realized something important. I'd acquired him too. Piece by piece, kiss by kiss, choice by choice. I'd collected this man as thoroughly as he'd collected me. And together, We'd built something neither of us could have created alone. 3 years later, I stood in our auction house, our third location, this one in Paris, watching Kieran negotiate with a particularly stubborn German collector. He was in his element, charming and ruthless in equal measure, and I still felt that same flutter of attraction I'd experienced the first time I saw him examining pocket watches in Mrs. Chen's shop. My phone buzzed with a message from our London office. The Italian Renaissance collection we'd been pursuing for months was ready for authentication. Could I come next week? I looked down at my left hand, at the Victorian sapphire that had been joined by a simple platinum band. Thought about the life we'd built. Complicated, sometimes ethically ambiguous, always interesting. The auction houses were thriving. Our reputation for impeccable authentication, bringing in clients from around the world. And yes, occasionally Kieran still dealt in those gray areas. But they were getting lighter, just as he'd promised. The contacts from his darker past were gradually being replaced by legitimate dealers and museum representatives. The questionable provenances were becoming clearer, more defensible. We were building something good, something real. Kieran caught my eye across the room and smiled, that slow, dangerous smile that still made my heart race. He excused himself from the collector and crossed to me, his hand settling at the small of my back with familiar possession. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured. "How far we've come from that first kiss. How you covered my mouth to silence my panic and ended up changing my entire life. Any regrets?" I looked around the Paris auction house, at the life we'd built together, at the future still unfolding before us with all its complications and possibilities. "Not even one," I said, and kissed him again. There in the middle of our empire of beautiful things we'd collected together,